My name is Mike Dowling, and a part of this seminar, I've been asked to provide a presentation of the findings of the IOF Fair Play Working Group. So first, some background. At the 2020 General Assembly, a unanimous resolution was passed to basically reinforce the importance of the basic values of fair play to protect the character of our sport. And basically the members of the IOF resolved to work together to protect the vulnerable character of fair play in our sport, to educate and influence our members, organisers and athletes to understand and respect the importance of fair play and to follow the rules of orienteering, to implement rules and methods to prevent the improvement of individual performance through the unfair gaining of knowledge beyond that which is available to all competitors, and to clarify norms, rules, guidelines and enforcement mechanisms to secure the fairness of competitions, and finally to stay true to the IOF Code of Ethics and embrace the good governance of our sport. So during the fall of 2019 and the spring of 2020, we conducted surveys regarding fair play in ethics. So the results of the survey gave us some valuable input into the work of meeting the targets of the General Assembly resolution and also the strategic direction focus areas for the IOF for our current working period. So Council established a Fair Play and Ethics Working Group at the November 2020 meeting with 4 goals. Online education tools regarding fair play in orienteering, clarifying in the rules regarding fair play issues, looking at sanctions for breaking fair play rules, and improving guidelines for stakeholders regarding fair play. So we were divided into 3 sub-working groups: education tool development, led by Tom Hollowell, guidelines for organisers, athletes and officials, led by Leo Haldner, and myself looking at rules, sanctions, improvement. So the sub-working groups consisted of representatives from the IOF Office, Council, Discipline Commissions, Rules Commission and Athlete Advisory Groups. So the Guidelines Group conducted an impact risk analysis to create a fair play risk amount matrix. These identified risks connected to fair play and were categorised in 3 groups: pink zone, very high and high, yellow zone, moderate, or white zone, low. So the priority, of course, was addressing what was regarded as pink zone risks. So in terms of these risks, we ended up analysing the rules in respect to the following areas. So the disability and eligibility of P-class in trailer, embargoes, maps, out-of-bound areas and forbidden routes, shortcutting in MTBO, the use of communication devices, competition integrity after the completion of a course, quarantine zones, the principles of fair play, competition integrity when it comes to officials, terrain and map knowledge, prior knowledge, not following a mandatory route, disciplinary sanctions process, appeals and coaching zones. So as a part of the findings, the first part was the development of what we call a fair play strategy. So basically the strategy exists as 4 pillars inside our vision, missions, values and our foundation. So these are clear rules and appropriate sanctions, clear guidelines to stakeholders, values-based education, and maintenance of full compliance with the World Anti-Doping Code. Also, we developed a set of, if you like, fair play principle documents for each of our stakeholders. And basically we're looking at what are some of the principles about prior to the event, before the start, during the race and after the competition. So these exist for athletes, team officials, event organisers, media and spectators. So the intention of these principles is that they'll be included as part of event information being communicated to the range of stakeholders in IOF events. So what are our findings or summaries, particularly when it's connected to the subgroup that I was involved in? So we reached consensus in all areas about rules proposals, except for the area addressing risk with respect to coaching zones. So further work and thought needs to be considered in the disciplines about the use of coaching zones. Existing guidelines connected to fair play were identified that had areas in need of improvement, and new guidelines identified connected to fair play to support organisers, event advisors and competitors. So let's now look at these findings when it comes to the specific rules and guidelines. When it comes to the disability eligibility of the P class, formerly known as the Paralympic class, when it came to rules, a clarification of the process to apply for P class eligibility, and for guidelines to update the guidelines to clarify the P class eligibility process for athletes and organisers. When it comes to the embargoes aspect of our rules, some minor changing of wording as part of the overall rules updating to basically provide a little bit more strengthening about the intent of the embargo rules. So in terms of guidelines, asking the discipline commissions to review current guidance on embargoes for organisers and athletes and to update if as needed. When it comes to maps, a harmonisation of rules connected to or pertaining to previous map access across all our discipline rules. In terms of guidelines, so guidelines for organisers regarding previous maps to be reviewed and updated, and to particularly include principles and actions to be taken by organisers regarding the publishing available geodata, such as LODAR, and auto-generated maps to ensure equal access to information for all competitors. Asking also the MAP Commission to produce guidelines regarding the protection of map and course information in the map and courses workflow as a part of event organisation. When it comes to out of bounds areas and forbidden routes, so when it came to the rules, again some harmonisation across our discipline rules, and in particular including the strengthening the requirements for the marking of out-of-bound areas in the competition terrain. In other words, mandating that if the edge between an inbound and out-of-bound area is not clear, then it should actually be marked in the terrain to assist athletes to know where those edges are. So that's connected, of course, to guidelines and strengthening the organiser guidelines on the marking of forbidden or out-of-bounds areas and in the use of mandatory routes, and also to develop what we call rules adjudication guidelines to assist organisers and juries regarding rulings on entering or leaving an out-of-bounds area. In terms of shortcutting in MTBO, so when it comes to the rules, a stricter definition of the rule to forbid off-track riding in IOF sanctioned MTBO events, unless it's specifically agreed to by the organiser and the IOF event advisor. So the default position under this rule is that in IOF events, off-track riding is forbidden, even if it may particularly be allowed in a particular country, unless of course that there is an agreement that it is to be allowed. So again, a part of this process is the MTBO Commission have developed some really good guidelines on shortcutting in that particular discipline. When it comes to the use of communication devices, when it comes to rules, again, harmonisation of rules and the clarification of what is a communication device in terms of a definition and where such devices are forbidden in a race environment. And of course, to review and update the guidelines for organisers and athletes to assist in the implementation of this particular rule area. When it comes to quarantine zones, now the quarantine zone is defined in this particular part of the rules, and the forbidding of the use of any communication device in such zones, except for those officials who are specifically authorised to do so by the event organiser, is now defined. So when it comes to guidelines, to update the guidelines for organisers and athletes, and develop a system to allow athletes to use electronic equipment that doesn't have communication capability in a quarantine zone. So, for example, a simple music player, and to have these developed. When it comes to competition integrity after completing a course, so when it comes to rules, just some improved clarity about what competitors must do upon the completion or abandonning their course in a race. And again, some more review of the guidelines for organisers and athletes to ensure that there's rules, and also asking the IT Commission to develop guidelines regarding data protection and uploading of race data to the internet during the conduct an event. When it comes to competition integrity connected to officials, again some minor change of wording as a part of an overall rules updating to strengthen the rule. And when it comes to guidelines, asking discipline commissions to develop guidelines for an organising committee declaration of interest system. That is for members of organising committees to declare and manage potential conflicts of interest, the clarification of what constitutes sensitive information, and non-disclosure agreement documentation for organising committee members, IOF officials and other stakeholders such as the media. So when it comes to the types of fair play sanctions and who and when imposes sanctions for fair rule infringement, so again, harmonisation of the types of sanctions that an organiser jury can impose for fair play rule infringement, and particular clarification as to who rules on fair play infringements during an event, that is the organiser and jury, and outside of an event, which is the new IOF disciplinary panel, which was established by the IOF at its last year. So in terms of guidelines, and again, some development of some rules adjudication guidelines for organisers and juries to assist in making determinations that are based on precedence and consistency when it comes to ruling on infringements that may have occurred during the conduct of an event. When it comes to the appeals process, a minor clarification on rules now that appeals are lodged to and considered now by the new IOF disciplinary panel, and some minor rules harmonisation when it comes to appeals. Not following a mandatory route, and again some guidelines here about strengthening organiser guidelines about the marking of forbidden areas, and particularly in the mandatory routes. In other words, setting the guidelines to make it very clear to an athlete where a mandatory route may begin and end when it comes to actual work in the competition area. When it comes to terrain and map prior knowledge, and again some minor changes to the wording to strengthen it as part of the overall rules updating process. When it comes to guidelines, the Rules Commission in partnership with discipline commissions to prepare guidelines that set out principles for guiding event advisors to interpret rules connected to this aspect. So we are considering a self-declaration system for potential competitors to be developed, for intended competitors to declare their degree of prior knowledge and described in the appropriate event organisation manual. So what are our next steps as far as continuing work in the area of fair play? So we're going to ask our discipline panel to embark upon a project to examine following and cooperation during orienteering races. This is a difficult and complex process, and it will be quite if you like, an interesting project for the discipline panel to embark upon. We need to complete and implement online education tools regarding fair play in orienteering, such that there'll be similar tools used for anti-doping education, and to have that tied to our IOF athlete licensing requirements. So I hope this has been an informative presentation of the work that was underwent when connected to reviewing our rules and also our guidelines connected to fair play. And in closing, I want to thank the participants of the working group for their input and thoughts and guidance in bringing this project to the particular point where it now sits.